Good evening. I hope you guys are doing well. Tonight I wanted to talk to you about three battles. The next ones on our chart, which are our Ville and our two burgs, Chancellorsville and Vicksburg and Gettysburg. And for your viewing pleasure, I have created these to help give you a visual aid as we're talking about the high points of each battle. Now remember, for your essay, the primary thing that you're supposed to be doing is explaining why the battle is occurring there and what was the result. So this picks up right after the Battle of Fredericksburg, where Burnside had his chance to come out of the gates doing really well, but it went poorly. And so the guy that's put in charge next is Fighting Joe Hooker, which you all read about. Now Hooker decides to take the battle to a place that's further upriver from Fredericksburg. So he decides to go up the Rappahannock to a place called Chancellorsville. It's pretty wildernessy, and that's where the bulk of the action occurs. Now you probably remember that Lee had split up his group. He had Stonewall Jackson doing his whole foot cavalry thing out in the forest, which encouraged Hooker to also split up his men. When everybody gets back together, there is just this amazing fight that occurs in all different types of landscape, but the bulk of it is in the wilderness. So imagine being out in the forest and having to fight there. This is the battle where Stonewall Jackson is killed by friendly fire. So I drew his name over here and the blood trickling down. Lee is kind of got Hooker pinned up, which he's smiling because he's excited about that. And Hooker, unfortunately, halfway through the battle, gets hit in the head by some falling debris from the mansion itself and is left dazed and confused for hours while the battle is still going on. Needless to say, this was disastrous for the Union, as they found that Chancellorsville was no better than what had occurred earlier at Fredericksburg. So even though the Confederates were outnumbered, they come out on top with this one. And it gives Lee a lot of confidence as he's heading into his next engagement, which will be Gettysburg. But before we get there, we are going to switch gears and take the action over to Grant and the Mississippi. Vicksburg, which is in Mississippi. And I drew a picture of the Mississippi River. Vicksburg is actually located right on the river, so kind of like a Jeff City type town. What Grant decides to do is to make the Anaconda Plan complete. And if you recall, when we were in class, we talked about how the Union was able to successfully get the port of New Orleans, and Grant was able to secure the northern half of the Mississippi River by getting victories at the two forts, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, on the Cumberland and Tennessee River. Now he just has to close up the center. Vicksburg, perfect opportunity. So Grant takes his men to this town, and what he decides to do is lay it to siege. So it goes on for 6 weeks. He's bombing the city. He's sieging them. The people inside were forced to eat rats. That's the little orange thing at the bottom. It's the rat. It was a bad situation, but it gives Grant the win. He was able to capture 32,000 troops and 3,000 civilians. Why is this important? Because the Union is able to control the railroad and the Mississippi River. Remember the Anaconda Plan. This is really important because it gave him that ability to squeeze the Confederacy off from any help that it might get from the border states or Texas out west. So this was essential. They had to control the Mississippi River. Now, very quickly, this brings us back over to the fighting in the Potomac on the eastern coast, and we are going to go to the awesome Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg takes place in July, beginning of July in 1863. And this battle, which you guys read about, is just full of some awesome scenes, but I tried to sum up the high points. Lee is trying to, once again, get possible help from European forces. So he knows he has to have a victory here. In addition, he's hoping that he can get some supplies. Reportedly, there were shoes in Gettysburg, and Lee has to control the pace of the war. Remember, he doesn't have a lot of supplies, so he can't dawdle and hang out like the North can. He's got to keep it going. So he's marching, taking the offensive way up north, and he was hoping that the North wouldn't be prepared for that. And the North knows he's on his way up there. They're kind of lurking around, looking for him. And finally, everybody converges on this quiet little sleepy Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg. Now, the most of the action in Gettysburg was fought at these three locations here: Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and Cemetery Ridge. Now, unfortunately for the Confederates, the Union has the high ground, and Lee was warned by his own generals not to fight here. They said, look, this is a bad situation. You need to go someplace else where you can control the situation and you can put your men in a better place. But Lee's like, no, I'm going to take it here or here. We're going to fight here. And that's exactly what happens. This is like 2-3 day battle, and it ends with this amazing Confederate charge called Pickett's Charge, named after the guy who was in control of these guys. And the Confederates do a frontal charge on Union guys who are behind, it looks like a giant green frog, but it's actually a stone wall. And they were just picking them off. And we've already talked about how frontal charges in this war were absolute madness. In the end, this has more casualties than any other battle or any other war combined. This is the battle that Lincoln comes to the battleground to consecrate the ground in the famous Gettysburg Address, which if you haven't read the link I posted, please do so, because it's my favorite speech. But back to the important side. What did this Union victory mean? It destroyed the Confederate offensive strategy. You will never see Lee go on the offensive again. And he had been able to before. But don't forget, he lost Stonewall Jackson in the Battle of Chancellorsville by friendly fire. Jackson succumbed to complications due to his injury, pneumonia. And without his foot cavalry, Lee is in a place where he's not sure where anybody is. Now the Confederates have to fight a defensive war. That's bad, because they don't have the supplies that the Union has, and now they're left not being able to control the pace of the war. Another thing that's interesting is Meade doesn't follow them and destroy them. He had the opportunity. Some historians believe that the weather, that rain, might have kept him from it, but nevertheless, it's one of the things that leaves Lincoln shaking his head. Why didn't you just destroy him? We could have been done. That'll be the end of those three battles today. Next, and I remember when we get to Gettysburg, we're on the downward slope. So next is going to be fighting back in Tennessee. We're going to look at Chickamauga, Chattanooga, and then we're going to be taking the action to Atlanta, bringing Grant over to square off against Lee, and it gets wrapped up pretty quickly. You guys have a good night, and I will see you all later.